Okay, let's start inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وارزقنا فهم النبيين وحفظ المرسلين اللهم افتح إلينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So today's session is going to be quite technical. There's going to be a lot of facts. There'll be a few diagrams. The nature of the topic we'll be looking at is a sort of a subtopic in psychology, but it's still an integral topic, and it is a topic by itself. It falls under the science of ilm al-tib, the science of medicine, and because of it is actually a very integral science, very complex, and requires a lot of skill for mastery. But I wanted to bring it into this subject of psychology because it is paramount to understand this. As a principle, we said in the earlier sessions, and we've been saying it continuously, that which manifests in the body will manifest in the soul. Whatever affects the body is going to affect the psychology, and then whatever affects the psyche is going to affect the physiology. So the subject we're looking at is the temperament theory, and the temperament theory it has been the foundational science of medicine for all of humanity up until the recent century or so. It involves a homeopathic and a holistic approach to medicine, as opposed to the could you pass me my tablet, please? Thank you. Jazakallah. As opposed to the allopathic medicine, which is what's practiced today. The holistic against what we would call the allopathic is more like partitive. Holistic medicine is more like wholesome, looking at the entire and not just the particular. Now, there's benefits to both. There is benefit to holistic medicine, and then it's got its shortcomings, and then there is benefit to allopathic medicine, and it has its shortcomings. And the best practitioner in arguably is one who has mastered both and implements both approaches. To implement the holistic approach, which would be regarded as traditional medicine, by the use of herbs as medicinal drugs, as opposed to artificial drugs, synthetic drugs, as well as the actual processes of diagnosis and finding out what the problem is and then how to treat it. So it's basically, it's become a dichotomy as such, the holistic against the allopathic, the whole against the partitive. The partitive approach looks at only the specific, a specific cause or a specific symptom or a specific issue, and then has its own approach to dealing with that. The problem with that approach is that it may fix the isolated incidents, but it does not take into account the holistic well-being of the individual, and then further to that, the mental well-being of the individual. So not just the physiology, it doesn't take into account the whole physiology of the individual, but then further to that, it is unable to progress and examine the mental state of the individual. And medicine is a praiseworthy science. It's one of the top highly ranked sciences in our tradition. And it's a vocative science. It's a science from the Latin vocare, means it's something that it's a calling. People have a calling. You have to have a strong spiritual state, a strong iman to get into medicine, because in the traditional sense, medicine was seen, like medical practitioners were not just seen as doctors, they were seen as healers. And it's a weighty responsibility to take on to heal somebody, whether physically or psychologically, right? So it's something that has an immense responsibility, and one that is born from the heart, to want to help someone, to help them heal, to help treat them. There is an incredible amount of patience that is involved, an incredible amount of forbearance that is involved, because not everyone can have that capacity to deal with, especially now when you start encountering complex or compound illnesses. And all of illness in this regard, in our tradition, was seen as something that could simply be dealt with by altering aspects of your lifestyle. That's not to account for traumatic illnesses, which require medicinal aspects. Something like you catch a cold, or a virus or something that requires antibiotics to heal. But other kinds of illnesses can simply be healed by simply altering the lifestyle of the individual, just by altering your diet or altering your physical activity, by altering the way your sleep timings, your sleep patterns, these kinds of things, right? And Al-Harith ibn I forgot his name, subhanallah. He said, Al-Ma'idatu baytu da, wal-himyatu ra'asu dawa. The stomach is the hub of illness, and good diet is the chief of cure. A majority of illnesses are simply caused by what you consume and what you excrete, what you bring in and what you bring out. And so consumption plays a key role in maintaining good health. And this is going now into the psychology of the individual when we talk about your concupiscent aspect, your appetites, the things you indulge in. Food, environment, things, you see, these will affect your health, and just maintaining a regulation of that can enable you to find a cure for the illnesses that you're dealing with. And there's an approach to that. We have in diets, you've got simple foods, then you've got compound foods, and then you've got processed foods. Simple foods are like just like a cucumber or an orange or a peach or a date. Simple foods, whole grain, right? These are simple foods. And then compound foods are how they're all put together. Like you add spices and you mix potatoes with something else and you do this and you make a stew, and all those are compound foods. And then you've got processed foods. Now, traditionally, the ratio of all this was that processed foods were virtually non-existent, because processed foods are a result of the processing power, the processing machine, the industrial revolution that brought about all these machines that are used to process these foods. The ratio was between simple foods and compound foods. And simple foods were the dietary staple of the general population. Compound foods were likely the province of aristocrats and the affluent who would be able to purchase all these various ingredients and have specialized people like cooks to prepare them for them. Now the balance has shifted in such a way that simple foods are a smaller ratio. And even of that smaller ratio, a bulk of it is artificial. It's not what you would call organic, right? It's got artificial substances in them. They will either be genetically modified in themselves or in the toxicities that are added in growing these foods. So whether it's the fertilizer or the weed killer or the pesticides or whatever it is that is brought externally onto them. These are absorbed by these foods, these plants that grow, and then these toxicities are in those plants that you. So even though you might be purchasing something that is said to be organic in the marketplace, but in and of itself, it's got a larger percentage of toxicity in it. Compound foods is now the staple of a majority of people in the world. Everyone consumes more of compound foods as opposed to simple foods. And then of those compound foods, you've got some people who have a larger ratio of compounded foods that are not, they don't prepare them themselves. Like you eating from a restaurant, for example, or fast food and all that. And there's a problem with that, because those foods are not prepared freshly. You see, they recycle the oils, and they'll recycle the waters that they will use, and they'll recycle the same dishes, or you'll find that you wouldn't even know. You might be eating the same food, the food that was prepared yesterday or the day before, and has just been repurposed or prepared for you and given to you, and you don't even know. You see, the smaller ratio is that which you prepare at home, and that's where a lot of people fail, because they don't know how to prepare these foods. Now, there's a reason why I'm saying this about foods, because the dietary aspect is composed of the same elements that the rest of creation is composed of. So in the traditional sense of the sciences, it was believed, and this is a true belief because the Quran verifies it, that all of creation is made up of 4 essential elements. And that's fire, water, earth, and air. Now, this is not the material fire or the material water or the material earth or air. It's not the material, it's the element. And the problem here is the term element, because the English language has unfortunately corrupted this term element to foremost negate this traditional belief that this is part of mythology and fantasy and fiction, the idea of the 4 elements. And then to replace the term element with something that is more of a biochemical nature, a material aspect of it. So you've got the periodic table of elements, where you've got all the hydrogen, sodium, and all these things, right? But the term element here is different from the material itself. The matter comes from the element. The element itself is not material. It is a quality of sorts. It's like the essence of it. So the human being is made of what you would call an asli composition, and then a thanawi composition. We'll come to the terms. I'm going to show you the slide, and you can copy down all the terms that we'll use during this session. So there's the principal composition. So the human being is made principally of clay, and clay is a composite of earth and water. So that's the primary element of the human being. And then you've got the secondary, which is fire and air, right? And then all other aspects of creation have some sort of variation between these different elements. Like a rock, for example, is only earth itself. If it has some moisture, then it will have the element of water. If it has some heat, then it will have the element of fire. You see, the plants have got their own elemental composition. So your body has a certain balance of these elements, and then the food that you consume has to complement that balance. If you eat a food that is against your natural composition, then it will put you in a particular state. And I'll come to that, because we're going to talk about the humors. So from the elements, you then get what are known as the temperaments. So you can actually share the slide now. We'll come to it'll be easier to explain through the diagram. Yeah. Now I'm just going to, I'm reading from a translation of Ibn Sina's Qanun. And this translation is, actually, can you go back to stop sharing? I can just show the book that I'm using. You can get this book. It's in English. It's not the best translation. Stop sharing then. Yeah. So this is the book that I'm using, and it's in English. I didn't want to go through the Arabic because it will take too long to explain the Arabic. So I'm just reading a translation. This is the book. It's titled Avicenna's Medicine. And you can find it. I got this one from Amazon for like $30 or something. So if anyone has this book, I'll just let you know. I'm reading from page 22. The concept of in Unani Tib. Now Unani is the Greek word. Is the Persian word for the Greeks, because the Greeks had in ancient Greece there were 4 tribes. So the Unani are the Ionians of the Greeks, and then there were the Ionians, and then the Dorians, and then the Achaeans. So the Persians called the Ionians Unani, and then this science was unique to the Unani. So this is what it's called. It's called Tibbu Unani. So they say the well-known cliche. This is the authors, the ones who translated this. They've given in their introduction. The well-known cliche about the elements is that is repeated over and over, is that the ancients thought that all matter is made of 4 elements. This is actually a bliss distortion of the real meaning of the term and its intended applications. Traditionally, the English translations of the term had ignored other terms that are actually more informative, which they have then discussed further into the text. So this is what I was saying, that the word element they have distorted it so that it doesn't actually mean what it is supposed to mean, as an elemental, as something that precedes. Go to the previous slide, the one before it. The temperaments, the term is amzija, plural. The mizaj is the temperament, is a concept and a method by which physicians assess the deviation of the body and any of its organs from normal homeostasis. Homeostasis is a stable state, the normal state. So every human being has got a normal state. If you remember, I say that every soul has been fashioned its own unique body. So every body has got its own variations of the 4 elements. So you've got the base element, which makes up all the human bodies, and then each body has its own configuration, how much of earth, how much of water, how much of fire, how much of air. And then these configurations, the arkan, which are the elements, give you these configurations, which are the amzija, and then these give you the akhlat, which are the humors. And we'll come to the humors as well. In comparison to the patient's population, race and species, ethnicity and such. So different peoples have got different configurations of these elements. To give you an example, during the Prophet ﷺ's time, he understood this as a concept. This is part of prophetic wisdom. So he dealt with the Quraysh in a different way. He dealt with the Bedouins outside the city in a different way. He dealt with the people of Taif in a different way. He dealt with the Ansar and the people of Medina in a different way, because all these different groups of people had a different characteristic based on where they have lived for generations. The environment, their ethnicity has developed a different configuration in each of these groups of people, different configuration of these elements in them to have different humors which define their personalities now. Simply, it is the expression that Unani physicians use to tell whether the whole body or one of its organs has the right temperature and the right moisture content. So the right temperature meaning hot or cold, as you can see in the diagram I have there, hot or cold, or the right moisture, which is dry or wet. And that's the configuration now. Hot, cold, dry, wet. Now, there is no absolute temperament because each one is variant. You've got a base temperament, and then it keeps changing as you go through life. We'll talk about this further and further, inshallah, in the next 2 sessions when we go through Imam al-Haddad's stages of man in life. You'll understand it better how these temperaments keep changing. Now, the 4 elements The 4 basic temperaments are this: the cold, the hot, the cold, the dry, the wet. These are the 4 temperaments. That's the temperament. It's what determines the temperament of the individual from a psychological perspective. So somebody who is hot and dry is prone to reactive states, is prone to anger quickly as compared to someone who is, let's say, hot and wet. And then somebody who is wet and cold is prone more to depression as compared to somebody who is, let's say, cold and dry or hot and dry. So these determine the temperament of the individual. These four temperaments, they end up, they can be configured in various forms. Ibn Sina theorized 9 different configurations. 8 plus 1. The plus 1 is a balanced state. And then 8 configurations. So each of those 4 have got, so you got a mixture of dominant temperament in you of, let's say, fire and water, or fire and earth, fire and air. And then you've got a different configuration of, let's say, water and earth, water and air, water and fire, like that. Different configurations. He identified 8 of those configurations plus 1, which is a balanced state. Later scholars determined 17 different configurations, 16 plus the 1 balanced state. The balanced state, the best example of the balanced state is the Prophet ﷺ, because he was always balanced in any of these temperaments. So if you look at the chart, you've got, and this is part of Islamic cosmology. This is the cosmology of the human, because we say that all of physical creation is made of these 4 elements. So these 4 elements are reflective outside, externally, as well as internally. So you've got the 4 cardinal coordinates. As you can see, there is the east, the west, and then the north, and then the south. And I've placed the north down as opposed to the top, because the classical Islamic configuration of the cardinal coordinates was in that fashion, not in the way we see it today. The maps that are generated today are from the European side. The Europeans developed the map whereby, and the cardinal coordinates, whereby north is seen as up and south is seen as down. But the Arabs did not have that cardinal coordinate. Their north was down and their south was up. Because if you faced the east, then Shemal would be on your right hand side, north, heading south, in our case now. And then Junub would be on the other side. And then Gharb would be behind you. So you're following the motion of the sun. You're looking at the motion of the sun setting behind you. And the day has passed. It is more oriented with the motion of time and space, as opposed to the system that we're following today. Because the system we're following today necessitates that you face north to determine the rest of the cardinal coordinates. So that south is behind you, and then east is on your right, and then west is on your left. And then you've got, in the center circle there, you've got, those are the akhlaq. No, those are the akhlaq. You've got, so then you've got the Safrawi, which is the choleric. Then you've got, and that corresponds with south. And then you've got the Balghami, which is the phlegmatic, and that corresponds with north. And then you've got the Damawi, which is sanguine, and that corresponds with east. And then you've got the Saudawi, and that's melancholic, and that corresponds with west. And the Safrawi is hot and dry. And it corresponds with south, because in the maps that the Arabs drew, south was towards lands that were arid and dry, like the continent of Africa and the Saharan desert in this case. That's really as far as the early Arabs had ventured. They didn't go all the way south to South Africa, north in their coordinates. And this was the land which was dry and hot, the deserts. And then Junub in their orientation, which would be north in our orientation, was the land where you had now the coldest lands. The Scandinavian lands, the northern Russian lands, and all this. Those are the cold lands. So those are cold and wet. And then towards the east, where the sun is rising, you had the sanguine, and the sanguine personality is hot and wet. It's a balance between the two. It's sort of mild temperature, right? And it's the direction from which the sun is rising from. And then on the other side, you have al-gharb, which is corresponding with melancholic. Now, these correspond also with the seasons. So you've got spring that corresponds with the sanguine personality. And then you've got summer that corresponds with the choleric personality. Summer is the month of heat. Then you've got autumn or fall, which corresponds with the melancholic personality. And then you've got winter that corresponds with balghami, which is phlegmatic. It's cold and it's wet. These configurations now, the choleric individual has the temperament of hot and dry. So hot and dry is choleric. And then hot and wet is sanguine. And then cold and wet is phlegmatic. And then cold and dry is melancholic. These also correspond now with those four elements. So the Safrawi has the element of fire as the dominant element. It's the highest in his in their configuration. An-nar. The sanguine has the quality or the element of hawa, which is air. That element is most dominant in them. The balghami has the element of water, and then the Saudawi has the element of ard. So ard, which is the lowest in terms of it is completely dry, and that's the terrestrial. It's dry and it is cold. It does not generate its own heat. That's ard. So if you look at a stone is dry and a stone is cold. It doesn't generate its own heat. Water is cool and it's moist. Air has got moisture in it, and it's also hot. Because when you, like, if you take water and you heat it up, the steam that comes out of it is moist and it's hot. And then fire is the most subtle of those elements. So earth is the most heaviest. Fire is the lightest. It is hot and it is dry. It has got no moisture in it. Go to the next slide. Okay. So the choleric individual, I've just listed a few characteristics of these groups of individuals. The choleric individual who is hot and dry, these kind of personalities, they tend to be touchy, they tend to be restless, they tend to be aggressive, excitable, changeable. They're like instinctive, and they are quick to react. In terms of reaction, you can see on this other side there is the tab of reaction, spectrum of reaction. At the bottom you can see spectrum of responsiveness. The tab of reaction, the choleric individuals are very quick to react. They are very instinctive, and these can be negative attributes, but they also have positive attributes. So they're good, they're very active, they're very optimistic, they have good memory, and they have sharp instincts. And if you look in our tradition, a majority of scholars were choleric in nature, because this is what made them good scholars, because they had a good memory. So the scholarly type of this group of people is the analytical type of scholar. This is where the sciences were developed. Mathematics, geometry, physics, astronomy, these are analytical sciences were developed by these kinds of scholars. The melancholic type, which is earthly and is cold and dry, these kind of people tend to be moody, they tend to be anxious, they're very rigid, they don't like change, they're very sober-minded, they're very chilled out, but they're also pessimistic and very reserved. They don't like to socialize, they're very quiet, but they have good leadership qualities. Because of their grounding nature, because of their stable nature, they're not reactive in that sense, they have good leadership qualities. So the choleric individual is quickly reactive, but is, in terms of their responsiveness to respond, they are moderate. Quick to react, but moderate in response. The melancholic is slow to respond, but moderate in their reaction. They're balanced in terms of their reactions. but they're slow in terms of their response. The type of scholars you find in this are jurisprudence scholars. The qadi, the mufti, the faqih, these kind of individuals who they appeal to law and order. They appeal to a sort of a structured, mannerism of doing things. They don't like doing things in a haywire manner. And then you've got the phlegmatic individual who is cold and wet. These kind of people they are very passive. They're careful, they're thoughtful, they think things through, and they're also adaptive in the same way that water is adaptive, right? It takes whatever course or it takes whatever vessel it's put in. And they're also calm, but by the nature of water, they can be very turbulent. If they're aggravated, they can become very turbulent. They're also very shy. See, water does not take its own course unless it's pushed, unless there's a force given. So they don't tend to make the motion themselves. They tend to just wait until they're prompted. And in that sense, they can be lethargic or lazy. They can be indecisive. They're not ready to make a decision. And so the phlegmatic is balanced in their response, but is very slow to reaction or to react. So when something happens or circumstance happens, they're very slow to react to it. But they are balanced in their response. They're not foolhardy in that sense. They'll be slow to react, but they'll at least think things through a little bit. And you find the type of scholars you get from this are typically language oriented, poetic and linguistic oriented, because language itself is fluid in nature, right? And poetry requires this sort of fluidity. And then you've got the sanguine personality, which is the element of air, who are hot and wet. And these kind of individuals are very sociable. They're responsive, they're charismatic, they're articulate, they're very confident, which can dangerously flow into overconfidence. And that also makes them impulsive in the sense. They're also very distractible because it's like air. You see, air keeps whatever moving, right? It keeps shifting. And that makes them ungrounded and compulsive in their behavior. The type of scholar you find here is the philosophical minded scholar, because they are very intrigued with trying to probe an inquiry into different things and to understand different. And so unfortunately it's a good mindset, but it can also be easily strayed off the track. So a lot of the philosophers were condemned for this because they really did go astray, and they went astray very fast and very far. Many of the philosophers go astray very quickly, even in contemporary times. If you look, the personality that is associated with dryness is somebody who is emotionally unstable. The sanguine personality, if you look, has a balanced reaction, but is very quick to response. A balanced reaction, very quick to response, which is a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing because the reaction can fall either way. It can go this way or it can go that way. So you might respond quickly, but you might be responding to the wrong thing, or you might be responding to something in the wrong manner without really knowing. So the dry personality is someone who is emotionally unstable. And then corresponding to that, the wet personality is someone who is emotionally stable. Emotionally unstable are individuals who are moody. They keep, a small thing can irritate them. They can get bugged up very fast. Emotionally stable, these things don't really matter. They don't really take that, all these things into the petty reactions into account. They don't think about those things. They don't want to get involved in those. The hot personality is exhibitive. So when it comes to their irascible nature, someone with a hot personality, their anger goes outward. They express it outwards. As opposed to the cold personality, their reaction or their anger is inhibitive. They will react internally. They will swallow that anger and it will bottle up inside. And then ultimately it will blow out. This is where you get things like anxiety and panic attacks, because it's a sort of a constriction. Angst, one of the meaning of angst in Old English is a restriction. It's like you have a river and then it's passing through a narrow constriction. So all that water is being forced there, right? Now these energies, the energy of fire and water and earth and air, all within you, with these compounding emotions and feelings, reactions, responses, or lack thereof, they want to come out. They flow through your body. These are all now energies. They're flowing through your body. And so you feel this constriction. You feel a shortness of breath, a panic attack. You feel a shortness of breath. One of the techniques that a physician will do is try to release the pressure by massaging the neck, to release the pressure so that breath can flow through, the emotions can flow through, right? Could you go to the next slide, please? Now, sorry, not this one. Okay, actually, we can go through this real quickly, but we'll look at this a lot more in next week's session as well. So the cycles now, this is cyclical. You can see that these correspond also to the ages that you go through, and this is what I meant is that the temperaments are not static. They're dynamic. They're not, you're not stuck with it. So even though you may have a base temperament, so you have a base temperament and then you've got the temperament that overlays that. So somebody can be like, for me, I'm a choleric individual. My base personality, my base temperament is hot and dry. But I have another layer on top of that, which is the Thanawi now. So you have the Asli and then you have the Thanawi, which is more hot and wet. So it keeps changing, and you can go through these changes on a daily basis and even through your lifetime. So someone like Imam al-Ghazali, for example, was a choleric individual, but he went through a stage in his life which was completely cold and wet, through a Balghami state where he was completely sunk in depression. So you can go through these stages. And so whenever once you identify what's the base temperament of the individual, and then what is their overlaying temperament, and so what state are they supposed to be in, and what state are they in, so that you can now begin to restore balance. And some of these balances can be restored simply by altering the state of the body. So if somebody is angry, for example, and they're a hot and dry individual, a choleric personality, increasing the temperature in the room is going to aggravate their base temperament. So if you're a choleric person and you're in a hot environment, you're going to get even more angry. So you need to cool down the body. And the same thing goes for foods, right? So if you're angry, you don't eat raisins. That's going to make your situation worse, because raisins are hot and dry. Dates are hot and dry. And some dates can be like hot and wet also, like they have some moisture in them. But it's going to aggravate the situation. No, you eat like a cucumber. It cools you down, right? You go through this throughout your life as well. So the sanguine is what the child is born with. The second layer of the temperament, the Thanawi layer. The sanguine personality, the child is born with sanguine as their overlaying temperament. And this corresponds with spring, because spring is a time of coming out. Everything is flourishing. That's the newborn, the new year now, cosmologically, not January 1st. And that corresponds with infancy. So the infant is joyous, is happy, is bouncing all over the place. And then they start going through their childhood. They start shifting from hot and wet. They start becoming hot now. Children are very active. They're very, running all over the place. They're very energetic. Then they go into pubescence, which is now coming into summer, transitioning from spring to summer of life, not through the year, but of life. You start developing this hot and dry personality, which is where you find a lot of pubescent individuals. They're very, reactive. They want to do things. They're passionate. This is where passion comes from. Passion is this transition between air and fire. The dance between air and fire is what increases the intensity of the fire. That's the passion. And then now they start transitioning from their pubescence into youth. They become dry now. And because of this transition, they are emotionally unstable. This is the later years of their adulthood now. They've just crossed over pubescence. They're entering into adulthood. And this is the age whereby now, you've got responsibilities. You want to get married. You want to do, have your family. You want to, your ambitions. There are things that are working out for you. Things are not working out for you. You've got stresses. You've got bills. You've got all these things. And so you tend to become an emotionally unstable individual because you're hit by things left, right, and center. Then you start entering into your maturity, your adulthood, and you start becoming now developing a melancholic sort of personality. And this gives you a little bit of wisdom. This is now when you are in your autumn stage now, your fall stage of life. Then you transition from that, and now you are entering seniority, whereby you are a bit inhibitive with your emotions. You're not bringing them out. You're not reacting outwards. You're a bit more wiser, you're a bit more grounded, and you can take a lot more than you could when you were younger. And then you enter into now your elderly stage, or the winter stage now, where now you are transitioning out from life. It is at this stage whereby you are in a cold and wet situation. This is where you are largely depressed. You're tired of life. You've dealt with so much. You're still dealing at that age where you're not able to deal with that, right? So you enter into this depression stage. That's your later stage in life. This is through the whole cycle of life. Now, in the intermediary stages of life, you can still go through these different stages. You can be in a good state today, in your spring stage today, a sanguine personality today. Tomorrow you enter into a phlegmatic personality. You're depressed, something happened, you see? And then you can counter that with something else. So if you're cold and wet, you're depressed, you want something, you want to liven yourself up. So you could eat certain foods that will give you a little bit of joy, some delight, something that will bring you back from that sanguine, that phlegmatic state to bring you back, let's say, into a balanced state. But you don't want to overshoot that until you become now overzealous and you enter into a choleric state. The idea is to find your humor. Where are you? What's your base personality in terms of your humors? Not in terms of I'm lively and I'm this and I'm all that. All that I gave in the previous slide that I showed was just to give you an idea, an indication of what kind of personality is there. But you want to look at the underlying now, beyond that, not the outward aspect of demonstration, I'm lively or I'm active or I'm compulsive or I'm this, that and the other, but what's underlying that now? What is your base temperament, and how do you bring it into a state of balance whereby it doesn't matter what affects you. You can deal with each circumstance accordingly. If it is a circumstance that requires anger, you can activate your choleric personality. If it is circumstances that requires you to be quiet and still, you can activate a phlegmatic personality. If it's a circumstance that requires you to be dynamic and to move around and to adapt, you can activate a sanguine person. You can be balanced in that sense. The more you know about this, the more you understand about the temperaments, the better your chances are of navigating your way through life. Okay, so you've got, these are the terms that we'll be looking at. So you've got arkan, which are the elements. Then you've got the mizaj, and these are the temperaments. So arkan are the elements, mizaj is temperament, amzija is the plural for that, temperaments. And then you've got akhlat. Akhlat are the humors, and that's your now the choleric, the melancholy, the sanguine, the phlegmatic. And then you've got a'dha, which are the organs and the limbs, and some of these terms we've used in the previous sessions as well. And then you've got arwah. Now arwah in this science is a technical term. It doesn't mean spirits, which is from the word ruh. Ibn Sina translated the energies as arwah. These are the energies that these four elements, they generate within your body. and then and within you. So you can just stop sharing for a moment. The energies in this case, you will find that the body has got, every body has got an energy field around it. In the physical sense, you've got, let's say, like an electromagnetic field of energy, you've got radiation, you've got conventional heat energy, you've got other energies as well. These are the energies that are from these four elements. And of these, you've got positive energies and negative energies. So positive energies are what keep the flow of energy running. Negative energies are what constrict that. And this is not fabrication, this is true. I mean, science cannot demonstrate this tangibly, empirically, and so this is why it's dismissed, but it can be experienced. It is an experiential knowledge. You have to experience this. So if you, for example, if you go into a nightclub or a pub, or you go into an environment where people are, let's say, drinking or smoking or gambling or doing all these kinds of things, you will feel, if you are spiritually sensitive, you will feel a negative energy around you. Compared to that, if you go into, let's say, the masjid, you will feel a positive energy around you. You will feel enlivened. And you can feel these energies. Now, the Chinese, the Buddhists, the Hindus, they have this also in terms of their practice of medicine, the flow of energy. In Hinduism, they call them chakra, right? So each part of your body has got a point or a junction that regulates the flow of energy through your body. So you've got like a crown chakra and I don't know what the other terms are. There's one on the top of the head. This is why part of the Hindu tradition is to wear that red, what is it called? Do you know what it's called? Who knows what it's called? Yeah, tika or something, yeah. Right? It's supposed to focus energy, to make the person more, intelligible or something. Then you've got your solar plexus, you've got your palms or something. They've got different places, have got different energy points that regulate the flow of energy. So if there's a trauma or something, then that junction is considered to be blocked in terms of its energy flow, and it can be reopened to remove the negative energy and then to re-energize that. And you can feel it. Like, you can try this yourself. Try it out. If some of you can put on your cameras, I would like you to see, and I would like to see what you're doing so I can correct you. You can try this yourself. Try it out. Put your hands out. Try it out. You could try it out. Try it out. Put your hands out. Can you, if you can switch on your cameras, and I can see if you're doing it right or wrong. If you put your hands out like this, and then put your hands together like this, and then put your hands back together like this. Now there's a certain sensation you're going to feel when you do it like this, as opposed to when you do it like this. There's a change of sensation. If you can't feel it, there's something wrong with you. Can you feel it? There's a certain sensation you feel on the palm of your hands when they're like this, as opposed to when they're like this. A feeling. You need to feel it on the palm of your hands. If you bring your palms closer, you will feel it at your wrist. If you bring your fingers closer, you will feel it even more at your fingers. And that's because what you're feeling is the energy around your hands. Your one palm is feeling the energy around the other palm. When you're like this, you won't feel it. You're feeling the air around you. When you switch it out like this, you will feel something in between your hands. You will feel it in the palm of your hands. And this is because the palm of your hands are more sensitive than the backside of your hands. And your fingers are the most sensitive parts of the palms of your hands. The practitioners, in this case, what's known as, I don't know what the term is, I forgot. They will attempt to feel the energy around the section that is injured or hurt or non-functioning, to feel whether or not it has got a negative pulse, a negative energy, or a positive energy. A negative energy means that there's something affecting that organ or affecting that place, and they will try to remove that negative energy by using other entities or other objects that can absorb those energies. Crystals are mostly used for that. The most common used crystal in this case would be salt. Salt is usually used to absorb that negative flow of energy. And a lot of people use like Himalayan salt and all those. You can go back to sharing that screen. So the energy flow is something that is paramount and is part of this sort of practice of the humors, to understand how the energy is flowing through the body, and then where is there a constriction. Things like as far as the physical body is concerned, things like bloodletting, hijama, cupping, these allow for the removal of those things that restrict the flow of energy in the body and open up the channels for the fresh flow of energy now. So the removal of especially like in the back area or in the place where there is an injury, the removal of toxic blood removes those blockages of energy flowing through the body. So these are the arwah, and then you have the quwwa. The quwwa is the inherent power or the strength of each organ or each faculty in the body and the soul. So you have quwwa al-khayal, the power of imagination. You have quwwa shahwa, the faculty of your appetite. You have quwwa al-ghadab, the faculty of your irascibility. These are the faculties or the powers. So the powers, each organ or each faculty generates a certain energy that flows through the body to regulate whatever it is that it's supposed to regulate. And so a restriction, that's what, like when I talked about anxiety, there's a restriction there. There's a flow of energy. Your emotions are being constricted. You want to scream, you want to shout, but then you've got a restriction. You've got a loss of breath, right? You can't breathe. There is a restriction, because remember what we said, it's the soul that's breathing. The lungs are just performing the function, but the soul is not able to breathe because there's a restriction. The energy is not flowing. The soul is a resonating entity and it's got its own energy. And then you've got the af'al, which are what the functions, as it's translated, the actions, the things that each of these organs or each of these faculties perform. Each thing has its function. Each component has its function. And then you've got musabbibat, which are the causes. The musabbibat are the things that cause. Now you've got the material causes. You've got, this also goes into logic as well. Like you've got formal causes, you've got informal causes. You see, what's causing a thing? You can have a material cause that is causing a certain illness. Like you've got a virus in the back of the throat that's causing you to cough. That's a material cause. But then you can have a headache, and that can have a material cause or an immaterial cause. It could be because of stress, it could be because of strain, it could be because of lack of sleep. Those would be immaterial causes as well. So determining the cause of what's causing the effect, the symptom, is part and parcel of treatment. Then you've got alamat, and alamat are different from the a'rad, which are the symptoms. The a'rad are what you can see as a symptom. So your coughing is a symptom. Your headache is a symptom. Your depression or you're feeling sad, that's a symptom. That's not the cause. That's not the root issue. You're feeling anxiety, that's a symptom. The symptoms are preceded by signs. There's a certain, like you can feel the illness coming. You can, I think I'm going to get sick tomorrow. You can feel it coming. That's a sign. You see? Psychologically, you have these kinds of signs as well. If you get into a confrontation with somebody, you got this preemption that, okay, this is headed in a direction that's going to piss me off. That's a sign. You're seeing that in that interaction, you're seeing the sign that you're starting to get upset now. You see? The symptom would be when you do get upset and you hit the person or you get enraged, your fists curl up or you grind your teeth, that's a symptom now of your anger. And that's being caused by the faculty, the quwwa al-ghadab, being inflamed at that moment. And that could be as a result of, depending on how quickly that inflammation took place, as a result of your humor. Because if you are a hot and dry person, then the chances are for you to get angry very high and very quickly. So you identify that and you say, okay, what are the things can I do to quickly counteract that? If there's a glass of water, you can drink that. If you're standing, you can sit down, as the hadith says, you see, or go and do wudu to calm yourself down. And then you've got afawiyah. Now, afawiyah are aromatics. This is part of aromatherapy. It's a lot. It's got its own understanding, its own science. The attar in the classical sense was somebody who didn't just make perfumes; he also made medicines, and he had medicines that were also aromatherapic. Not so much as they are now, but I would recommend you to look into things like using essential oils as aromatherapeutic medicines. I just made that word up, aromatherapeutic. It doesn't exist. Does it exist? I don't know if it exists. I made it up. But aromatics play a foundational, because one of your primary senses is your nose, is scent, and scent is of a higher domain. It's of the domain of the samawat, the scent. Like when you talk about the fragrance of Jannah, for example, scent is of a higher domain because scent does not have the groundings of materiality. So scent plays a key role in altering your state. Just to change your state, you could simply, like you could not be hungry, for example, but then you get the aroma of food and suddenly you feel like you're hungry, even though your body doesn't need it. But you feel hungry, your appetite is activated, your state changes. You could be in a state of depression and then you have a certain fragrance that can give you a bit of joy. Similar to that is also the application of the chromatic scale as far as the sense of hearing is concerned. So music in this case also has therapy and music. The right kind of music can heal you or it can completely destroy you. So this is one of the reasons why many of the ulama prohibited the use of music in terms of leisure and specific kinds of music as well. I mean, now you've got so many of those specific kinds that you can't make an argument for music being halal anymore. It's very difficult for you to make that argument. But the right kind of melodies at the right notes, and this is why in terms of scent also, an attar, somebody who makes perfumes, will talk about this in terms of notes. Fragrances have notes, right? And they've got maqamat as well. And so music also has maqamat. And those maqamat will put you in a certain state. So Al-Farabi, for example, he was in one of the Abbasid, Caliphate Abbasid, or I don't know which, one of the caliphates, one of the caliph's courts, the sultan's courts. And they were sort of testing him and interviewing him. And so they asked him, do you play music? Can you play the oud? And he said, Hati. He said, bring the oud. And he started playing. And he played a maqam and they all started laughing. Like they were excited. It was nice. And then he played another maqam and they all started crying. They became sad. And then he played another maqam and they all fell asleep. I see. So music can also do that. It can alter your state from joy to sadness, from sadness to joy, from wakefulness to sleep, to put you off to sleep, right? And then you've got ifraq, which is now the recovery process. The identification of the illness, which is from the cause, the signs, and then the symptoms, and then the process of healing, and then the process of recovery. It's very important for any practitioner to be able to identify these stages, because you could think that, like for example, George Washington is a good example. I don't know if like you can access the healers, those who are healing George Washington. I think you can access their notes online. I'm not sure. But if you look at their notes, they kept letting his bloodletting. They kept every day, they would remove a little bit of blood. But they were doing it every day and they kept saying it, in their notes. Bloodletting was done, the response weak and pale. The next day, weak and pale. The next day, weak and pale. Now, they were not monitoring his in terms of recovery. See, they thought that he was still sick, so they kept doing that. But he had already crossed over from healing, and he was now in a process of recovery. But they were continually treating him while he was in recovery by the same measures that they were employing before, and that's what killed him, because they kept letting out his blood every day. He was getting paler and weaker, and then he died. So you have to identify the stage of recovery, which is very important, because you don't want to, you see, too much medicine can become poison. You don't want to administer treatment continually while the patient is in a state of recovery. The same thing applies to psychology. You don't want to continually try to psychologically treat somebody when they are actually in a state of recovery, when they're in a state of thinking or self-thought, self-reflection. They're trying to figure things out themselves, and you're bombarding them with your psychological theories. You're actually going to aggravate or make the situation worse for them. So it's very important to identify the stage of recovery. And then you've got the asli and then the thanawi, which is the primary and the secondary, or the foundational and then the tertiary. And that's where the humors are. You have to identify what's the base temperament of the individual, and then what is their tertiary temperament. So a base temperament is determined by their natural state, their homeostasis, who they are ethnically, what tribe they're from, or which region they're from, their background, what sort of personality is associated with that, identifying that base temperament, and then identifying the tertiary that keeps changing. Now, this is very important because, and unfortunately, the Muslim world doesn't give this regard anymore. I mean, very few practitioners use the temperament theory, which is a very sad thing, because witchcraft and sorcery employs temperament theory. You see, magicians use temperament theory to affect an individual state. So if a person is cold and wet, they'll give a counter, they'll send a jinn that can counter that, or affect them in a different way. You see? So if somebody is, let's say, of an earthly element, they'll send like a jinn that is of fire or of air to sort of throw that off balance. You see? Magicians and witchcraft and all these things, they use these. And unfortunately, when it comes to treatment of such kind of patients, many of our practitioners, they cannot treat that patient. They don't know how to treat them because they don't understand the temperaments. Now, you can't treat something like sihr, for example, using allopathic medicine. It's not possible. You have to use homeopathic or holistic medicine, which means you have to understand the temperaments. Anyway, and then you've got these four, which are the different states now. Harun, Ratabun, Baridun, Yabisun. The hot, the wet, the cold, the dry. Understanding this in terms of the human body as well as in terms of the foods. If you look at each food, you can analyze and determine whether that food is hot. And that doesn't mean in terms of like temperature, like you put it in the microwave, it's hot, and then you remove, that's hot food now. Or you removed it from the fridge, that's cold. No. In terms of its property, its naturally inherent property, like dates are hot, raisins are hot, milk is hot and wet, cucumbers are cold and wet. You see, so identifying those and then creating a balance in your diet to incorporate both. So one of, like, there's a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ used to eat dates with cucumber, and he said, "Hada yubaridu hada." This cools this. The cucumber cools the date. In terms of now taking in a balanced diet. You see, and those are the essential terms that you will encounter in this study. And there are a lot more terms when you progress through, if you're going to take this study on. You can stop sharing that. There's not much else that I wanted to discuss on this subject itself, because it's very technical and it's its own field of study. So I don't want to get too much into it. You can't cover this in one single session. It requires a lot more thought. But I did want to bring it up because it requires, you do need to take it into consideration if you are going to look at Islamic psychology. Understanding the humors is foundational. Scholars like Imam al-Ghazali, for example, he makes it a requisite to understand temperament theory if you're going into the teaching field. If you're going to be a teacher, you need to understand temperament theory, because you've got a collective of individuals, whether young, young adults, children, young adults, whatever. You need to understand what are the different temperaments that you're going to be encountering, and how are you going to relate with them? How are you going to make them understand? Because a choleric person will be very analytical as compared to, let's say, a phlegmatic person who is more synthetic, as compared to somebody who is melancholic, who is more defined. So teaching each individual in their own accord is very important. I mean, the same case applies to understanding your own children. A lot of parents don't understand the natural temperament of their children, and they may end up making it worse in trying to raise those children, because you could be counterproductive to their growth. If you've got a child who's throwing tantrums, doesn't necessarily make them a choleric individual. There could be something else that's bothering them. It's either their base temperament or their tertiary temperament, and you need to understand which is which, because if you try to, let's say, discipline the child in a certain way, it might make the situation worse. The idea is that once you identify your base temperament and your tertiary temperament, you want to avoid doing the things that will aggravate those temperaments. You want to try and bring them back into a state of balance, because they will function best when they are in a state of balance. They'll function most efficiently when they are in a state of balance. It's like the engine of a car, you see. Its optimal operating temperature is, I think it's 80 degrees or 40 degrees. That's its optimal operating temperature. If it gets too hot, the engine malfunctions. If it gets too cold, it will malfunction. It will overuse its fuel, or it will be inefficient in the power that it produces. So bringing it to its optimal working and its most efficient level, its balance. But you need to identify what the temperament is and what are the configurations. Insofar as those who are in the field of psychology or in the field of physiology, in medicine, going more deeper into it to understand now, because each organ also has its own temperament. Each organ has its own fire, water, earth, air configuration. Understanding that configuration will help you better understand when it is off balance, so that you can apply or understand what you need to apply. Do you need to apply a holistic approach to medicine or an allopathic approach to medicine? In some cases, a prescription of simple foods might work, like eat a date every day or eat cucumbers every day. I know of one of my teachers, he had a patient who had kidney stones, and he had a very difficult time passing those stones, and he was due for an operation to take those out. And he told his patient to just eat watermelon every day, simple food. And in a very short time, the stones were passed, and he didn't even need to go for the surgery. See, simple food sometimes can help cure the problem. He had another patient who was trying to conceive and was having trouble, and he told them to eat a date every day, just one date every day. And then they came back to him with a newborn baby. Congratulations. So sometimes understanding just a simple approach, like a holistic approach, can help solve the problem. But not necessarily always the case. Sometimes you have to understand also that an allopathic approach is better than a holistic approach. So you need to understand both in order to then apply both. And the application of both approaches is better than an application of only one. Because you could be applying an allopathic approach and then you make matters worse. And then your patient has to now endure long-term effects, long-term side effects that you might not even be there at that time to take responsibility for. You probably forgot about it. You see? And then that poor person has to deal with that problem for the rest of their lives because of your negligence in that. So understanding this is very vital, it's very important. It's the last section that we looked at. Imam al-Ghazali was talking about this, because this is the medicine that they were using at the time. And this is why he said this is a very noble science and very important, and much of mankind is in negligence of it. You don't necessarily have to be a doctor or a practitioner to try and at least understand the science, and for your own benefit or for the benefit of your family and your children. And I think we will stop here, inshallah. Have we been, how long has it been? What's the time?
6:20.
Okay, we'll stop here, inshallah, take a quick break, and then we'll leave it up for question, answers, discussion after that, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan, and I'll see you in a short while. Alhamdulillah. Okay.
Yes.
Alhamdulillah. Okay. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Now, so, sorry, what was the question again? Can somebody, where was it from the chat?
May I know such kind of physician today to consult?
Yes, yeah. So, if you're like, I think in the India, Pakistan, Indian subcontinent area, you can find, I think they call themselves Hakim. Yeah, you can find the Hakims. It's difficult in the West because they sort of have an integration system. Some people, they do have a homeopathic, have their own homeopathic practices, but they're not necessarily Islamic based or Muslim based. But they're still functional and they're still workable. It depends on where you are. You'd have to search in the place where you are. We don't have a base, a direct or a default designation for such practitioners anymore. It's a practice that unfortunately we have abandoned for the most part. So it's hard to pinpoint where you might find somebody. Yeah.
Do you personally know somebody?
Personally, I only know my teachers. I don't know any practitioners per se, and so I wouldn't be able to recommend anyone per se.
Yeah, because there is something like Hakim, so like if I try to go to Pakistan, but I don't know whether I could trust them or not, because I don't know, I want some reference or something so that...
You'd have to ask those people who are there if they can recommend somebody that they know, whom they have had a good experience with and they can trust. But I'm sorry, unfortunately, I can't recommend anyone from there because I don't personally know anyone there.
In Turkey?
Sorry?
In Turkey?
In Turkey, there are many. In fact, in Turkey, a lot of the practitioners are also licensed doctors, so they do a bit of both. So, like where we are here in the city of Trabzon, there are quite a number of practitioners.
So, do you recommend someone in Turkey, in Trabzon, or?
I can give you some recommendations, inshallah. If you
Okay.
can message me, and then I can look up some of the contacts I have, and I can recommend.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
inshallah.
What is the science called where one can say to use it for self-improvement?
The science is called ilm al-tib or ilm al-amzija, the science of temperaments or the temperament theory. And there are many institutions that offer this as a science, or it's also called Yunani Tib or Tib Yunani, which is frowned upon by mainstream Muslims, because the moment you bring the word Greek into anything, it just gets dismissed as haram. So it's very difficult to find. But there are a few institutes that do teach at least the basics. And I'm sure you can do an internet search for where you are, and you might find some courses that you can study as a practitioner now. And what we're doing, like today's session, was just theoretical. It's just the concept of it. But as a practice, is a different study altogether. Yeah.
What's the correct opinion
Sorry, come again? There are many flies today here.
Opinion on homeopathy is use alcohol as a base.
Homeopathy as alcohol as a base? I'm not really sure it does. Allopathy uses alcohol as a base.
Even homeopathic also.
Well, in some instances, yes. But, and so far as the fiqh is concerned, the alcohol that is used is medicinal alcohol, is not, unless it is being used as ingestion alcohol. Like you take a shot of brandy if you've got a cold or a cough, that's now crossing the line. It's way beyond the line, I would say. But insofar as the fiqh is concerned, for medicinal purposes, the ijma' of ulama, they don't put that in a category of haram if it is used as medicinal. Because, for example, if you're going to stitch a cut and you need to sterilize both the wound and the needle, alcohol is the best compound that you can use to sterilize. It doesn't put you in a state of intoxication, and its purpose is medicinal. It's not for pleasure or any such. So it really depends. In our tradition, every field had its own fiqh. So if each thing, even medicine has its own fiqh, right? There is a fiqh of medicine. Language has its own fiqh. Philosophy has its own fiqh. So each thing has its own fiqh, and that fiqh examines the field of study and its practice itself to give you the parameters and guidelines of practice. So if you're going to be studying this, let's say, from a Muslim practitioner who is a scholar of the field and a practitioner, then at least you have some assurance that that person may have the right knowledge to teach you within the guidelines of the Sharia. But studying this from someone who is not a Muslim practitioner, who has just studied this, let's say he's done Chinese acupuncture here, and he's done a little bit of this there and a bit of that there, and he's put it together, yeah, then you're going to have to be a bit more skeptical as to how they're going to teach you and what sort of substances that they'll use and how they'll use them. So each thing will have to be analyzed by itself. Mm-hmm.
Just a quick session was that.
Mm-hmm.
Since I'm a student of acupuncture, I hope the session would benefit me more in the future. As for allopathy, many of former practitioners call it an evil system of medicine. People like Omar Zaid called it evil. Dr. Fadlur Rahman, who is a former allopathic doctor, exposed many evilness of it,
Mm-hmm.
abandoned allopathy, and later studied acupuncture and practiced it.
Mm-hmm.
He is considered the father of Indian acupuncture.
Yeah.
For the session.
Yeah, undoubtedly. Allopathic medicine, I mean, what it has become, it's got its benefits. It wouldn't be prudent, it wouldn't be accurate to condemn the whole thing as evil. It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The thing itself is not evil. It's practice that becomes evil, and that's something that's in our tradition. That's an usuli principle. The thing itself is not evil. The thing itself is not haram. It's its consumption or its usage that becomes haram. So allopathic medicine has its benefits, but has to be recognized insofar as its limits, right? Each science has a had, it has its limits. What it has become now, allopathic medicine, is it's just crossed those limits now, and it's driven by profit. So, the kind of surgeries and the kind of inoculations and vaccinations and all these things, it's really crossed its limits, and it's just a profit-making machine. I mean, people forget that Muslims used allopathic medicine. I mean, we developed allopathic medicine, by the way. This is not a Western phenomenon. The Western phenomenon is taking that allopathic medicine beyond its limits. Vaccinations, the Muslims developed vaccinations. Lady Montagu, and you can read this up, you can find it on the internet. Lady Montagu was the wife of the ambassador to the Ottomans at the time. When she came here to the Ottoman Empire, and she was in one of the hammam, and she noticed that the women, their skin was flawless. It wasn't pockmarked as a result of smallpox, right? You get smallpox and then it leaves blemishes on the skin. And she asked them, like, don't you get this illness here? Don't you get smallpox here? And the women told her, yes, we do, but we treat our children at a very early age. And then she found out how the treatment was done. And the practitioners, they used to take a little bit of the disease and using like a thin blade, they would just scratch on the skin just to introduce it, a very mild amount to induce the illness, and then the body develops an immunity against it. Those are the first vaccinations. And that's when, so Lady Montagu took that back to Europe, and she was faced with a lot of criticism when she took that back. But then when there was a smallpox epidemic in Europe, her children were the first Europeans to be inoculated. So people forget the Muslims developed all these, even allopathic medicine was developed by the Muslims. The idea of cauterization, the idea of surgery, these things were developed by the Muslims. It's where the limits lie. See, the Muslims, and this is I think you can only relate this to Allah's tawfiq, is that He inspired all these scholars to maintain, not to toe the line, not to cross the limit. The West condemns Islam and Muslims for abandoning the sciences, Otherwise, we would have been the dominant civilization in the world. But that's not the case. The Muslims recognized the boundaries and they stopped there. The West took this and extended it further and beyond its limits. And that's what we have today now in terms of allopathic medicine. That's the evil now. Because once you cross the boundaries that Allah has put in place, now you're going into evil. Right? So yes, the whole thing, the entire thing is not evil. I guarantee you, if you've got it's that same allopathic doctor who is probably an atheist who's going to treat you and you will find and you'll be better. It's not going to be evil for you at that time, will it? So the whole thing is not evil. You have to identify what are the aspects that are evil. The things that they're doing now, yes, those are condemned as evil. All the giving children, infants vaccinations of AIDS and HIV. Why are you doing that? Well, what's the need for doing that at 6 months old? And this vaccination, this other vaccination, and all these compounded external artificial chemicals into a body that has just been fashioned and a soul that's just integrated into that body, taking no account for the spiritual state or the mental state of that infant, and to induce all these things. They're going to have long-term effects, detrimental effects. And it also goes into, the suggestion that there is an agenda behind this. I won't deny that. There is definitely an agenda behind the kind of medicinal practices that are in place today. But the whole thing is not to be condemned as evil. The idea is to create a balance, because homeopathic medicine, holistic medicine, is more qualitative than it is quantitative. And allopathic medicine is more quantitative than it is qualitative. And the idea is to find a harmonization between the two. If you can harmonize the two, then you are a practitioner, a healer, a practitioner of medicine, a true practitioner, a true healer. But bias on either side is going to be detrimental for yourself and your patients. So it's a good thing to, rather than dismiss something in its entirety, to examine it and to take those aspects that are valuable and beneficial and then leave out the rest. You see? So anyway. Any other question?
My husband's kidneys are working to 25 to 30, 23 to 25%. Do you know some treatment that could save him from dialysis and later transplant?
I'm sorry, I can't give you a treatment on that. I have no idea. I have no idea of his because I might suggest something and that makes it worse for him.
But give me
But you know,
It's not about the treatment, but maybe some, like the physician, something that you said,
yeah.
or such type of treatments, but not going into this dialysis and the transplants.
There's a principle in usul that the scholar's response is at the mercy of the questioner's question. So depending on the question is the response given, and that response might not be accurate. So without knowing his actual medical condition, his actual tests and all that, to give any form of response on that would not be right. Because I might suggest he takes something and that actually counters the effects. But what I would recommend is not to take any form of treatment for granted. Do as much research, as much study as you can to anything that is recommended by the individuals who are doing the treatments, whether it's dialysis or they've recommended transplant. What does it involve? What's the whole background and reasoning to that, and then what are all the alternatives that can be pursued, and then make a sound judgment based on that. You are at least in a better position to make a decision at that point than to decide early on without understanding the entire process. So that's what I would recommend, to understand the entire process of the treatment involved or recommended, and then what does the transplant involve? What are the effects after the transplant? And then what are other options? What are other alternatives?
Something that would
Yeah.
maybe-
Sorry?
Something that could maybe reverse the already was damaged, but prevent further damage. You might not be able to
It depends on
reverse,
yeah.
you might be able to
Prevent further damage, yeah, because it depends on the kind of damage that is occurred. Some damage can be reversible, some damage cannot be reversible, and the only approach is to prevent further damage. Some approaches to medicine will require, like cutting off the hand to save the arm or something of the sort, right? So surgery might be the only option that he has. A transplant might be the only option that he has to prevent further damage or to save his life. So you need to look at all the options that you have available to you. I would strongly recommend, don't just jump off his current medication or treatment and then simply go off like on a fully vegetarian diet or something and fully herbal or something like that, without examining both and understanding the process of both, because ideally it's not one or the other that will help. It's a combination of both. If you are able to find a combination of both, then it will help heal better and faster. So while you're still doing the allopathic medicine that is being offered to you, other things may help complement that. So the holistic medicine might help complement that. So let's say alteration in diet or some herbal remedy might help complement that to help faster recovery, or to even improve the current condition of the kidneys in this case, such that he may not even require surgery later on. So this is what I would recommend, is to do a proper and thorough research before making any decision. Yeah.
allopathic medicine,
Wa'iyak.
the remedy in itself, but can be used to allow the patient an opportunity to reach the remedy.
Yes.
It only relieves the symptoms. The remedy is to look for the causes and
Find the solution for them. Yes, correct. Correct,
Any
yes.
thoughts on dementia and Alzheimer and remedies of the soul and how to help someone retain dignity?
That's a very good question, and very complex to answer. Very complex to answer, because both Alzheimer and dementia have got a physical inhibition as well as psychological. So you kind of have to treat both simultaneously, and it's a very difficult thing. And anyone who is suffering from either of those, it's very difficult. It's difficult for them, and it is difficult for those who are looking after them as well. And it's difficult to reverse the effects as well. But there are people who have come out of it, who have recovered from that, who have been cured from that. So, yeah, yes, there have been incidences where people have recovered from that.
Can I just ask,
Alaikum salam.
how do you help, say your parents is suffering possibly with male child Alzheimer's, from a spiritual perspective, how do you help them, in that chapter of their life, close that with dignity and a lot of comfort? Is there anything like from a spiritual practice, like how do we support that?
So in the case of either Alzheimer's or dementia, first of all, understand that the individual does not have responsibility on them. The qalam has been lifted off them because they're not in control of their actions or their thoughts and the actions that result from those thoughts. So you have to look at them change the perspective, because even though you're dealing with an adult, a grown-up, you have to understand that they are masoom in that instance. They have an innocence that you have to nurture for them in that instance. In terms of the spiritual side of it, just the creating that positive environment can have dramatic effects on them, because a lot of the things that they will do in terms of the one who is taking care of them, the amount of patience and forbearance, as I mentioned in the beginning, being a healer is a great responsibility, and it is a vocation that comes from the heart. It's not just a matter of doing the action. Like, okay, I have to do this for my father or this for my mother and this and this and this and that. No, it's not just about that. The heart has to be involved in that. This is your life mission. If Allah has chosen them to bear that disease, that illness, then He has also chosen you to take care of them. And this is now your path to paradise, and that's something that you have to look at, examine it from that perspective. This is your path to paradise. So cultivate it as best as you can, right? So treating them with the utmost, affection and the respect and all that, in addition to also consider that anything that they do, they are doing from masumiyat, right? It's from innocence. It's not deliberate. You see, it's very difficult for you to do that. It's very difficult, and it's understandable. It's a big burden on you as well to take care of them in that sense, but you have to take that approach. You have to, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ease that passage for you. It's not an easy thing, and I can sympathize with anyone who is in that position. But just creating the environment that is itself positive. In terms of treatments and such, like I said, I'm not going to offer any sort of treatment like this because I don't know their current position. I cannot recommend any sort of solution per se in this mannerism unless I physically or personally diagnose them. So I'm sorry, I can't offer any more than that.
Is this science dangerously close to zodiac signs and all the elements therein? Astrology and astronomy that basically says the elements depend on the date and time of birth. What is the
Yeah.
for the signs?
Yes, you're correct. It does go dangerously close to that, to zodiac signs and all that. This is why, witchcraft uses that. So sorcerers, magicians, they'll use that. They'll use the temperaments against, because it's there in you, right? And yes, people do take it into that side. Okay, this is it. Now, by the way, that chart that I showed you with the seasons and the cardinal coordinate, it also expands outwards from the terrestrial to the extraterrestrial, which is now space. So corresponding to those 4 temperaments are also the constellations. But the subtlety here is that those things do not affect, it's just a sign. The zodiac sign or the constellation in which the person is, let's say, born, doesn't affect the state of the individual. It's just that they have that temperament that corresponds to that. This is a cosmological reflection. the aspect of astrology comes in, whereby the belief is then applied that that constellation or that zodiac or this season or this, that, and the other, it is responsible for how you are. No, it's not. You are responsible for how you are. You just have that configuration that you have been given. You see? And yes, it does come very dangerously close to astrology, to numerology, to all these sciences now that are outside the limits, that are used in witchcraft and sorcery. So there are limits to the science, and this is why I say that if you're going to study it, you need to study it with somebody who is themselves grounded in the religious sciences, not just somebody who is, it may have a PhD in it, but doesn't necessarily understand the limits. Because going back to the principles, right? We have the axioms. One of those axioms, I keep versifying it. أهمها عقائد ثم الفروع تصوف وآلة بها شروع. Aqaid, branches of practice, which is fiqh and sharia, tasawwufun, purification of the self and the heart. Then take an instrument to go in any field that you want to go into, medicine, this, that, and the other. So unless these are in place, that person who is practicing that does not have these, there is a question mark insofar as them understanding the limits and parameters of their practice. And like I said, every science has its fiqh. So ilm al-tib also has its fiqh. It has its parameters, it has its hudud. Any more questions?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Before I ask my question, I would like to give a comment.
Yes, sir.
Regarding the stomach, which you have mentioned that all disease starts from the stomach. Unfortunately, nowadays, we people don't know the basic, the adab of the eating. For instance, 4 years ago, when I had the problem with the stomach, I started researching on that, and I came up with a professor from the Soviet Union, and he explained in a simple way that when we eat, we drink water or tea or juice. In this case, we are like damaging ourselves, because the acid which produces by the stomach, we just make it weak. For example,
dilutes it.
Stomach produce 100. Yes, it's 100 purity, and we add water, and it gets weak.
Yeah.
And after that, the meal gets spoiled inside us.
Yeah.
So this is how the diseases comes out, and also the gas creation starts from there. So after using his advice not to drink water or tea juice during eating the meal, so it could get rid of other issues.
Yes.
And the question is, unfortunately, about the previous lesson. Could you please explain a little bit the word la'iba from the Quran? Bismillah, wamal hayatu dunya illa la'ibu wa lahu. The word from the articles, it says it's only the root word is la'iba, but there are also ab, it's like drink, carve, so they are not connected. Am I right? Or the root words are different?
No, la'iba is a trilateral root, which means you can use it for like to play games. La'iba is to play, la'iba is to have some sort of enjoyment. And la'iba itself does not have any, as an action, does not have any purpose or any reason or any meaning. So if you want to look, if you look at all sports, any sport does not have any reason to play the sport. Any game has got no reason as to why you should play the game. Any sort of play does not have any reason. The only purpose it serves is to have some sort of a channel, a recreation of sorts, a vent, somewhere to just channel, because it's a world of stress, right? It's a world of conflict, it's a world of burden. So there's to be some sort of a channel in which that burden can be relieved. That's the only purpose it serves. But it itself has got no reason. So this is why every game generates its own rules, and those rules have got its own loopholes. It's just a closed circuit in itself. It doesn't have any existential relation whatsoever. So that's la'iba. And then you've got la'abba, which is got la'abba is a word in which the root is abba, ayn and ba, and then the la in is like sort of an emphasis, an emphatic, and the abba there has to do with drinking. So that's a different root from the word used in that ayah in the Quran. So indeed, the innamal hayatu dunya la'ibun wa lahun, and lahu is like just frivolous, empty, like it's got to do with just pastime, just leisurely activity. So that's the nature of the world in itself. It is a closed loop. It generates its own frivolous laws that have got no existential role or purpose, because it all ends, right? It's finite. In terms of a grand cosmology of it, everything that is in this world is going to end. It's going to finish. It's going to diminish. So everything that's generated within the world of causality, of materiality, is going to perish. It doesn't have an endurance. It doesn't continue onward. So it doesn't have any existential reason or purpose. And that's why it's not given a higher designation. It's not given any higher regard insofar as Islam is concerned. And that's why the ulama always frowned on games. Like at that time they used to play chess and all these kind of shatranj and all that. And they used to frown on that. It's a waste of time. Now, as for the earlier statement that you made, you're actually very right in that, because the four temperaments, they correspond to, I forgot to mention that. You've got the Damawi, which corresponds to blood, and then you've got, I think I'm getting this right or wrong, I'm not sure. Then you've got the Safrawi, which corresponds to yellow bile. Then you've got the Balghawi, which corresponds to phlegm or mucus. And then you've got the Saudawi, which corresponds to black bile. So these are the essential four liquids that contain energies within the body, and each has its purpose. So it's the blood, the black bile, the yellow bile, and the mucus. And insofar as what goes in the stomach, where the bile is concerned, while you're eating food, taking any form of liquid will do one of two things depending on the composition of that liquid. So if you've got, let's say water, depending on how much water you take in with the food, it will dilute the acidic content of the bile that is used to dissolve the food. So digestion might be delayed, and that can cause you other problems, stomach problems and so on. Within a certain tolerance limit, the body can recover, because the body goes through cyclical events, right? A circadian rhythm of sorts where the body recovers itself. So almost in every daily cycle, the body, once it goes through its process of digestion and excretion, a lot of the issues reset themselves until the next cycle begins and more food is consumed. But too much can cause different problems now. You see, you can end up having, certain foods require you to take liquids with them. So fiber, for example, you've got soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. Insoluble requires you to take more water so that that fiber can be utilized. So certain foods require you to take liquids with them. And then other foods, depending on the kind of liquid you take, like if you're taking juice, for example, depending on what kind of juice, if it has a high acidic content, like orange juice, for example, that will improve the acidic content of the stomach, but you don't want to take too much because it will make it too acidic. And then you've got other kinds of reactions taking place, especially if the food is spicy, for example, then you're going to start having, acid reflexes and, all these kind of other issues. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It doesn't apply to every circumstance, but the recommended is not to take too much liquid while taking food. The idea is to consume your food first and let the food take its place in the stomach, and then to take water or any liquid, and then have it take its place, and then to take air. And that's the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Divide your stomach into 3 parts: food, water and air, because you need all those 3 states of matter: solid, liquid and gas, which then corresponds to your natural homeostatic state. Yeah, it doesn't apply to every instance. It applies to certain instances where you do need to take some water. And certain foods also require you to take some sort of liquid to help you push the diet, because if the food is too dry, then you're going to have other problems. It's not passing through, the air passage is blocked, you start choking, all those kind of things. So yeah, maybe you need to take a bit of a sip to just help push the food along. That's okay. But you can't take a half a glass of water with every bite of food. Then the ratio, the content in the stomach just goes off, And so if the acid gets diluted too much, then the gallbladder is going to function in overtime, and then now you're going to start having gallbladder problems, right? So it can't be habitual. It has to be. This is why, like in the text where Ghazali says, you see, he says you need to monitor your wakeful state moment by moment to identify where you are, where you need to be, and where you're headed towards. Are you going towards the right direction? So you need to monitor your state, psychological state as well as your physiological state. You need to monitor how you're eating, how much you're eating, what's the quantity, what's the rate of eating, how much are you chewing, how much is unchewed, because unchewed food is going to have other problems as well, right? How much of each quantity are you taking insofar as what's your plate is concerned? Is it a balanced diet, quote unquote? All these things, you need to keep an eye on. You need to be consciously aware of that. How much water or how much of a drink are you taking while you're eating? Do you need a second helping? Is it required or is it not required? Because some people will instinctively go for a second helping where they don't need it, simply because of the way they are sitting while eating. So all those things you have to constantly monitor for yourself. It's not just only about the stomach, it's about other functionalities as well. Because the moment food touches your tongue, the entire body goes into a different state of operation. It moves from one state of operation to a different state of operation entirely, such that all aspects of your entire digestive system now come into effect primarily, and then tertiarily the other organs also start functioning. Your breathing will change, your taste buds, your saliva content will change, how much phlegm is produced, your mucus content will change, your blood coursing through your body, that will change. So the seat is where the stomach is. One of the Western practitioners, when he saw the ayah in Surah Al-A'raf, Kulu washrabu wala tusrifu, eat and drink, but not in excess. He made a comment and said, your prophet did not leave anything for Galen. And Galen was the par excellence of medical practitioners at his time. Your prophet didn't leave anything for Galen. Everything is, this is it. If you can just manage this insofar as your consumption is concerned, which is both physiological and psychological, your shahwa, your appetite, as well as now your physical, what's coming in, physical material quantity coming in and quality coming in. If you can just manage that, you're going to have a prosperous life. Inshallah ta'ala.
one question, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding Ibn Sina's book,
Mm-hmm.
from the translation, is it mentioned regarding infections and the stage of disease of each organs?
Yes, he talks about all that. This is why it's called the Qanun, right? He talks about everything insofar as the diseases and their treatments were known to him at that time. And many of these are universal and they are conceptual, which means that they can still be applied today. Yeah. This book that I have is a translation and a commentary like merged together. So it's all in English and that's what it looks like. It's a good translation. I mean, for like if you're just generally reading and trying to study it, it will suffice. If you're more scholarly in this case, you might have issues insofar as certain technicalities are concerned. But it's a good book. And yes, he includes different kinds of diseases. He includes different kinds of foods that you can eat, what sort of herbs you can blend for the treatment of those diseases. He grew all his herbs himself. In fact, here in Istanbul at the Museum of Science and Technology in Islam, if you go to Istanbul, behind the Hagia Sophia, there is what's known as Gulhane Park. They have a garden where they've grown all of the herbs that he mentions in his Qanun. And you can see those herbs, what they look like, and you can even grow them yourselves. Like you can grow them at home. If you have pots, you can grow those herbs yourself and use them. In fact, a majority of his treatments involve very simple ingredients. You'll find the usage of simple foods like honey, cinnamon, turmeric, things that you already have in your home. Something like cough, the ease of cough is a very simple 2 teaspoons of honey, 1 of turmeric, and half of cinnamon as a paste, and it works very well as for cough. Turmeric is a natural antibiotic and also a natural antacid. So just taking turmeric with milk will help with acid reflux. If you've got a cut or a graze or something where the skin is exposed, application of turmeric will help combat any sort of infection that takes place. If you've got a burn, just application of honey will help prevent damage and will also help recover heal the burn. So very simple ingredients that you can almost find already there in your home that you can use. Now, yes, there's a question. Go ahead. Sorry, was it Tim?
What about? Yes. Sorry. Is it? Did he use Latin names for the disease?
No. All the terms that he uses are in Arabic. Yeah, the Latinization is what they did. Avicenna is the Latinization of his name, and so the Romans, the later Romans, they Latinized his works. I'm gonna give you a brief. I don't have it in terms of, if you find the book, it's on page number 40. This is let me just give you an example of that. So he splits it into theoretical and practical. In terms of theoretical, he's got 3 components: physiology, anatomy, and pathology. Anatomy is understanding the body structure in terms of the biomechanics of it, which is the muscle and the skeletal structure, and then the organs and their placements. Because if you have a pain on the side, how do you know whether that's your lung or it's your kidney or what is it? Like, how do you know? If you understand anatomy, where the placements are, then you might be able to identify what that pain is without having to go internally. And pathology is tracing back the disease itself. So if it's something you contracted, let's say, you got a cold or something. It's trying to figure out how did that arise, where did that happen, or if it's a more complex disease, how did that disease come to be. And then you have the physiology. Now in the physiology is where he's got all those terms that I gave you. He's got those. So you have the arkan, which are the elements. Then you've got the mizaj, which are the temperaments. You've got the akhlat, which are the humors. A'da, which are the organs, and that also includes the limbs as extensions. Then you've got the arwah, which are the energies. Each thing has its own energy. And then you've got the quwwa, which are the faculties and the powers of each component. And then you've got the af'al, what are the functions of each of those. So that's as far as the theoretical aspect is concerned, which is what we were doing today. Today's session was theoretical. But then you've got now the practical application of it, and that's put into three categories. You've got prevention, diagnosis, and then treatment. Prevention is preventing a disease from occurring. Diagnosis is when something has happened, a disease has happened, an illness has happened, so figuring out what it is. And then you've got the treatment of that. So in terms of prevention is where he's got a larger collection there. He's got 6 essential requisites that you have to do in terms of prevention of disease. And these are very important. They might seem trivial or non-essential, but they're very crucial. Fresh, clean air, number 1. Number 2 is food and drink. Number 3 is movement and rest. Know when to exert effort and when to give your body time to replenish itself in terms of rest. And then that extends to sleep and wakefulness. How much of sleep and how much of wakefulness. Too little sleep is problematic. Too much sleep is problematic. And then eating and excreting. Quality and quantity. How much to bring in, and then monitor also what's coming out. I know it's disgusting to do that, but it's you have to monitor that. Because if you start seeing things like blood or something like that, then that's a symptom, right? You need to be aware of that. That also gives you an indication of the state of the humor, because you will see yellow, black, red, or like whitish, which is the blood, the yellow bile, the black bile, or mucousy, whether it's from the stool or the like the vomit. So if you're vomiting out, you need to identify that, what is it that's coming out, because there's something that is an imbalance. That's why the stomach is bringing it out. And then the 6th is mental health. So you can see that the actual practitioner of medicine involves mental health. So you have to take the mental health into account, because the issue that you're looking at might be as a result of some sort of stress, some dilemma, some psychological imbalance. So maintaining sound mental health is crucial to maintaining sound bodily health. And then he's got, so those are the 6 essential requisites, and then he's got exercise and diet. The body needs to be active and its diet needs to be regulated. You cannot have a diet that is biased over something. Like you're eating fast food every day, or you're eating meat every day. Meat is not a good thing to have meat every day. Red meat, or you're eating only vegetables every day. You need to sort of have a balanced system of diet. And then there is diagnosis. Diagnosis involves, number 1, interview, so a medical interview. If you've got the patient, you need to sort of have this initial consultation to understand. They need to tell you what it is that they're experiencing, how did they experience, when did they experience, what sort of pattern was established. You see, because you're the one who's going to be reading between the lines to understand what went on based on what information they're giving you. And so as a practitioner, you need to be able to derive as much information as possible, which means you need to be able to ask the right questions. If you're a patient, you need to be able to give as much information to your physician as possible, so that they can be better prepared to formulate a correct understanding, correct diagnosis. And then there is nabd, which is checking of the pulse, which is either on the wrist or under the jawbone there. checking of the pulse to see whether or not the pulse is regular, it's steady, and it has the right intensity. And then there is lisan, checking of the tongue, because the tongue discoloration or different kind of coloration on the tongue will give you an indication of any sort of toxicity that is internal. Then there's the checking of the urine, the feces, the stool, and of course the vomit. This is why your doctor will ask you for a urine sample or a stool sample to understand what's going on internally. And then there is pain and fever. Pain, where is the pain? How much is the pain? What's the intensity? What kind of pain is it? Is it steady? Is it throbbing? Is it pulsing? What sort of pain is it? Is it burning? Is it biting? And then the fever. What's the fever? How intense is it? How long is it lasting? Is it increasing? Is it steady? Is it decreasing? What's going on as far as the body temperature is concerned? And then there is treatment. Now, treatment involves the use of medicinal properties, products which are dawa, medicine, and then applied therapy, which is ilaj. So it's not just about administering drugs, it's about the therapy that goes with that. This is where now those who say allopathic medicine is evil, this is where the evil lies now, because many will just give the medicine or the drug, but will not actually give it in a therapeutic way. You see, they'll give you a prescription, take this in the morning, in the evening, and blah, 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 and then come back after 10 days, I'll see how you're doing. That's not therapy. You're a pharmacy, you're not really a doctor in this case. And then there is cauterization, there is cupping, there is enema, there is massage, which is chiropractic, and there is venesection. You can look up all these terms and you can do your own study of what they are. Cauterization is the treatment of a wound, whether by, at that time they used to just burn it, seal it shut, or by stitching it together, or by bandaging it. Cupping is the hijama, and that includes bloodletting as well. Enema and venesection are what we today refer to as venesection is more like intervention therapy, like you put the IV on, that's like venesection. Enema is to clean out the bowels. So they used to do this to clean out the bowels, whether ingesting it through the mouth or from the rectum, where the bowels are completely cleaned out of whatever is in there that's not coming out, right? And then chiropractic and massage is really vital. Modern doctors, medicine practitioners, they don't see chiropractic as a valid field. They laugh at chiropractic, but chiropractic can actually do wonders insofar as healing any problem you might have. Just an adjustment of the body. In the past, they used to do this. The humors could easily be treated by just going to the hammam. Just going to the hammam because the hammam, it gives you a hot and wet environment, and then following that up with a dry and or dry and cold diet can bring your internal state into a balance. Now, in the hammam, included in that, they would also do chiropractic adjustments, which they still do. And that alone can really just get it, like getting your neck realigned or something, or just straightening out your shoulders or realigning your spine can take care of so many things like breathing problems or muscular pain, or just you've got a pain in your stomach and it's not really attributed to diet. It's just a matter of adjusting your spine so your diaphragm can sit back, in line. Can be treatment for you. So that's his broad outlook. I forgot to mention that. I'm sorry. It's a good thing you reminded me. Thank you. But that's his broad outlook of what holistic medicinal approaches or holistic medicine requires. That's its approach. Yes. Question?
Assalamu alaikum, Ustad.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
I was in Montreal recently, and I saw that the sky in Montreal is not blue anymore on it clearly. It's like grayish blue, and even the clouds, they are not white. Not the cloud that has rain. They are kind of gray, and where there are water in them. They're not black, they are like grayish black. Now, I was thinking why this is happening because, and you can feel, I can smell kind of a burning smell, but it's not smoke from the forest, from burning stuff from the forest. It's kind of an electric smoke coming in the air. Now, is this because of them increasing the, I guess, the frequency of the 5Gs from the satellite and the 5G towers causing now the air to be burning or in electric? And that's affecting also the body of the people, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it's from that specifically. The recent fires that risen from the north that's spreading southward, there have been reports of them having some strange kind of toxicities that they can't really explain it until they do a study on them. And the likelihood is they're going to probably dismiss it and say it's nothing, it's no big deal or something. But that kind of toxicity is I mean, first of all, all these, the cloud seeding that they've been doing, was spraying all, the chemical, what are they called? Chemtrails? To try and cause rain or the formulation of clouds when the clouds are not even actually there. That alone, burning of that, because that settles, right? That rain is acidic, and so part of that rain is probably that acid is what's burning and leaving that acrid stench in the air. So that could be one of the reasons as well. Insofar as something like 5G causing something like that, I don't know. If you look at it from a physical perspective, from physics, it's hard to say, because if that's the level of toxicity, then human beings should have actually been, as we would have corroded by now. Like, we would not have survived that, because that kind of acidity in the air, people will be falling dead in an instant. So I don't think it's from something like that. I don't think it's something from something like 5G in terms of airwaves and all that. It's just the air quality itself is just bad. The air quality itself is bad because you've got so many kinds of pollutants already existent in the air, in addition to all these other things that they're doing, all these other genius excavations that they're doing to induce rain and to do all these kinds of things. And then the toxicities with which are already polluting the forests, in addition to all the toxicities that are being dumped in there from chemical. I mean, you go back to something like, if you can look it up, you can look up DuPont, for example, in the United States. They've been dumping chemical waste for decades in the rivers, to the degree that when they did a recent study, they found a trace of that chemical PFOA existent in almost every stream of fresh water in the world. And in fact, when they did a further study, they found almost every living creature already has that chemical in them. So I mean, if that's one example already there, what's to say there's not 100 other, evil corporations that have flooded pollutants everywhere, which is now, when you burn those things, you get all these kinds of toxicities that are coming out. It's not carbon, it's not natural wood that's burning, because the soil absorbs all that chemical, and then the plants and the trees, they absorb all that, and then you burn that, and you're going to get toxic chemicals in the air. There are many things that people have been reporting. I heard people reporting things like formaldehyde, and I don't know. The thing is, when something of the extraordinary happens in today's time, the airwaves are full of conspiracy theories, and it becomes very difficult for somebody to try and find out an objective understanding of what's really happening. So there are a lot of things that I've heard about those fires that Some seem compelling and compelling enough to investigate. Others just seem too far-fetched to even make sense. And yet there is still a truth that is out there that I believe people have not yet understood as to why that is happening, or why those effects are taking place, why that kind of toxicity. And then what are the effects of that insofar as people breathing in that air? And should they be taking, I mean, generally, if you're in that region, anyone there, you should be taking precautions. Just be very careful when you go outside, you know, have some sort of a breathing mask or something so you don't inhale all that crap. Keep your windows closed, don't bring that air into your house. So just be careful, take your precautions in that. There's still, I feel that an investigation should be done on that. People need to understand what exactly is happening, because the rate of fires, forest fires, have been increasing over the last few years, and the intensity of them is also increasing, which means it's going to get worse and worse and more worse. It's a compounding effect, you know. So, anyway.
We have the source of the poetry.
Thank you, Jazakallah khair.
That
The source of the poetry that Baba just wrote.
yes, yeah, Roshan can give you the. It's a poem by Muhammad ibn al-Habib, and he can give you the whole poem, inshallah.
So inshallah, I will send it in the group.
No.
From the figure you showed, shows that people from specific region have specific characteristics, but with these different characteristics of people from the same region. Is something of these characteristics and then secondary changes them?
Yes, yes. So people from specific regions have specific characteristics, and then those same people might have demonstrate a different kind of characteristics. So the you've got the base temperaments, and then you've got the secondary temperaments that they adapt to later on. And it's very difficult to determine that now in today's time because of the incredible amount of migration that takes place. People go to different parts of the world and then they adapt. So that the adapting aspect is the secondary temperament. So somebody, let's say from sub-Saharan Africa, goes and lives in a Scandinavian country, going from a very hot and dry environment to a very cold and wet environment. That's a dramatic change. It does not take away from their base temperament. The base temperament is still there because that's what they were born with in terms of their configuration, but then they have an adaptive temperament. So where they may have had a base hot and dry and then a secondary hot and dry, they go to the Scandinavian country and they will still have that base hot and dry temperament, but now they will adapt to a more cold and wet temperament. And that's an adaptability. So, but it's very difficult to determine because of the amount of migration that has been taking place over the last few decades. In the past, it was much more easier to identify people's temperaments based on where they are. Ibn Khaldun does a good, because he does it more sociologically than medicinally. He divided the world, or the known world at that time, into 7 zones, and he identifies each group of peoples in each zone base and says this is their characteristic. So the people from this part of the world, they have got this characteristic, and is very accurate in that sense, sociologically. Today it's very difficult to identify that because, I mean, if you take the Indian subcontinent, for example, before you can even identify somebody from the Indian subcontinent, the first question would be, is he Pakistani or Indian or Kashmiri? Because that alone has already configured their mental state, their psychological state, which in turn configures their physical state. Because you've got nationalistic and patriotistic ideologies first, you know, you've got national boundaries before you've got your ethnical background put in place. Anyway, that's a discussion that goes in a different direction.
The genetic system is constantly poisoning us from directions, every fight from all directions. Sound, weather, food, chemicals, and also when we talk about
Okay. Yeah, the attack is from every direction. In my book, The One-Eyed Impostor, you'll find the explanation in there, and there's also the lectures that we did, in which I made mention that this is not something that you combat using only one thing. Like you can't face the Dajjalic system using fiqh or aqidah or just philosophy or just it has to be because the attack is from every direction. I say. So the trials and tribulations are suffered from every direction, and Muslims need to really wake up and exert their efforts towards the greater enemy instead of fighting over the remote control while the house is on fire. Because that's the state we are in. Everyone is fighting over who gets the remote control while the house is on fire. Insofar as the hadith that says the food of the believer will be subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, there are two aspects to that. It's not physical nourishment. This is a more spiritual nourishment. It's basically what the hadith is saying is that it will reach to such an extent that the only way you will be able to survive and to keep your mind survivable, to cling on to life, is remembrance of Allah. That's the only thing that you will be able to be. Everything else would be so corrupted and so detrimental that you would not survive it. Now, the hadith itself is also a premonition, because prophecy involves both the wa'd and the wa'id. It's giving you a promise of what will come, and then it's also telling you about the admonition of it. It's giving you a warning. So Muslims need to examine, because the thing is, what has happened with the ummah is we become passive observers, which is kind of a stupid mode of living that we have adapted for ourselves. We've just become passive observers. We're just waiting to see what will happen. No one's making preparations. No one's preparing themselves for what's going to come and how they're going to face it. You know, I mean, the Christians, they have got fewer. If you look at the Bible, you might find maybe 3, maybe 4 signs of the end times. That's really what Christianity, this is what they're making more preparations for themselves than we are. See, we're still fighting over who saw the moon and whether or not you should follow Saudi or the Sunnah. That's what we're battling over here. They're making their preparations. We're not doing anything. We're not making any preparations. We're not putting any contingency plans in place or protocols to follow. Like, what are you going to do? When Imam Mahdi makes his announcement in Mecca saying, I am the rightly guided Khalifa, come pledge your allegiance, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to take a flight? Are you going to get a visa to Saudi? How are you going to get there? What are you going to do? When things start happening, what are you going to do? We don't have anything. We don't have contingency plans. We don't have protocols. Whether on a large communal scale or on just the individual scale, like your family. You don't have anything set in place for what you're going to do when things start happening. You don't have that one bag that you're going to carry with you in emergency in the middle of the night and depart when things start happening. You're not prepared. We're not prepared for anything. And this is why we're going to be the greatest sufferers at that time. And it's unfortunate. It's our own fault. It's nobody's fault. So, you know, we need to be prepared. We need to put something in place. One of the main things that we need to prepare ourselves with is the knowledge itself, because knowing what to do requires knowledge. It requires a study. The whole reason why we're doing all these courses and all these things is part of the preparation for you to understand the reality that you are in and how you're going to deal with that reality. But this is just one man's attempt at it. It's not something that can be accomplished by a lone wolf. It has to be a collective thing. It has to be a communal thing. So Muslims need to really wake up. And anyway, let's. But you're right. The attack is from every direction, and we're just, aimless. We don't even know where it's coming from. We can't even see it. The attack is right within every household. and we can't do anything about it.
Sir, I'm just the only one who's still there. I just like what you just said, just like a minute ago about like we're not prepared and for the after.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, like, and so like it has really like I always thought about that. I mean, like I'd like Sheikh Imam said talking about creating a village and all sort of these things, and then you talked about the knowledge. And so like I was asking you, like I'm just like 22 years old and just finished my school. Like where can I like start to like study or gain knowledge so that I can be, I can say, prepared or say like more knowledgeable.
Where are you? Where do you live?
I live in Germany.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about how things are in Germany. I don't know what the condition of the Muslims are there, how well established they are, whether or not you can find a place where you can study in Germany or not.
Sorry for interruption.
No, go ahead.
I can say like I'm also willing to move abroad if I can say to acquire the studies so that because when I see Sheikh Imran Hussein, like I just like want to be just like as knowledgeable as him or have like acquire more knowledge to be like that.
I would recommend, like, if it is within your means and you are able to move to a Muslim country, you will not find anything in a secular country other than a means to making a lot of money, maybe, if you are able to navigate the system and the capitalistic system and the bureaucracy behind it. To move to a Muslim country whereby as a youth you are able to enforce the ummah from within. If you come to Turkey, you will have the benefits that this country can offer insofar as further education. There's a lot more progressing in Turkey that many people from the outside are unaware of. Until you come and live here and get a taste of it, then you understand exactly where or what direction the Turks are moving towards. Or go to any of the other Muslim countries whereby you're able to participate in fortifying the Muslims from within. Because you see, your contribution to the ummah might seem insignificant to you, but the very intention that you formulated with can have monumental effects, if not in your lifetime, in the lifetime of those subsequent after you, those who come after you, or those whom you influence alongside. You cannot achieve that in a Western country unless, it's a matter of helping the Muslims who are there. But then again, you need to be in a position to be able to help them. You see? So if your intention is to seek knowledge, is to learn, is to study, if you're able to get that where you are and help your fellow Muslims where you are, then that's a good thing. But if that's not within your means or it's not possible where you are, then my recommendation is to see if it is within your means to come to a Muslim country and help enforce the Muslims from this side. You can't help them from the outside, you see, but you can help them from the inside. And there is benefit in being within your own people, within your own community. Yeah. So wherever you are able to, wherever you can go, if it is, if it is in Pakistan or it's in Kashmir or it is in Morocco or Egypt, Sudan. I mean, Sudan it would be difficult right now to make a move in Sudan. But, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and wherever you're able to go, there is ease. People are, you see, the West has been alienated. Many Muslims from the West have been alienated from the Muslim countries, so they don't actually know how to go about these things and they don't see the benefit in them. All they're being fed is negativity. And the negativity is there undoubtedly. You see, insofar as a materialistic life is concerned, it's not progressive, it's regressive. You're not going to get the things that you get in the West. It's going to be a step down for you. But that's something you're going to have to deal with for the greater good in this case, right? So many of the Muslims there are being fed with this negativity that it's a backward country. But there is a lot of benefit in that backwardness that they don't realize, they don't see. Yeah. It's a different lifestyle, it's a different mindset, it's a different way of doing things. And insofar as the religion is concerned and the learning of religious sciences, that's given its due preference. So this is where you will benefit better than where you are. So that would be my recommendation. Anyway, let's end here, inshallah. And unless there's any other question or any comment. Okay. سبحانك وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين بارك الله فيكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته جزاكم الله خيرا. I'll see everyone next week inshallah. No.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
عليكم السلام. عليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
Yes, sir.